And I am unmuted. Thank you for that lovely introduction. My name is Marilyn, and I am an alcoholic. I am from Maine, and I will tell you, Maine is one of the smaller populated states in the Union. And I've been watching people come in, and I'm thinking, holy cow, there's a lot of alcoholics coming into this meeting today. This is one of the bigger meetings. It's fabulous. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Okay, I'm going to start my timer now. I was thinking about the excitement that I felt coming this afternoon and being able to be here. 1 week ago today, I celebrated, get ready, 34 years of continuous sobriety. So that means I am 1 week into my 35th year, but 34 years. This is a woman, and I was going to say this girl, because who knows? I was not a woman of any kind of grace and dignity 34 years ago. Couldn't stay sober for 34 minutes. And I found you, and I'm going to tell you how I found you and all of that. And so I've been kind of walking down nostalgia road all day, and a little smiley and a little tearful. So let's see where this goes. I am from Maine. I was born in Maine. I was born in a small town that is actually 8 miles from where I'm living today. So I live on the banks of the Androscoggin River, and I've lived on the banks of the Androscoggin River my entire life. I'm from a little town called Lisbon Falls, and you probably have heard about us. There were 3,000 people in town when I was growing up. My mom and dad were part of the greatest generation. My dad was an Army flyer. My mom was an RN. And when they came home to Lisbon Falls, Maine, my mom took a job in the local doctor's office. My dad, who grew up in Lisbon Falls, took a job in the woolen mill. And they set about doing what so many of the people who came home from World War II did, which is to raise their family and just have a nice life. And my parents got me. And I always felt apart from and not a part of. I was an only child, and I was quite convinced that I was the only child in Lisbon Falls. And I know that that's not true, and I knew it wasn't true then, but that's how it felt to me. And that's sort of how I was, just kind of wandered through school, wandered through whatever I had to do, feeling like I was apart from and not a part of. And to say that people knew me, I mean, they certainly did. My mom worked in the only doctor's office in town. My dad had grown up in town. And anyway, I did okay. I did okay as long as I was kind of in school and I had my friends and everything was great. But I am blessed with a fairly good intellect. And I am blessed. I'm curious. I'm a very curious person. And so I do well in school. I do well. I've done pretty well. And I graduated from high school and went off to college. And when I went off to college, I left Lisbon Falls with very, very high expectations. And I went off to the University of Maine at Orono, and I arrived at school in 1969. And I was lost. I was just lost. I couldn't, it was too big. There were too many people. I didn't know anybody. It was terrifying. And somewhere in that first week, someone said to me, would you like to go out and have a drink? And I said, yes, I would. And I drank one weekend on a borrowed ID because I'm looking at a lot of the people here. And you remember that in 1969, right around there, the drinking age dropped to 18. And I turned 18 my first couple of weeks at college. And so I got into all of the trouble that I am going to talk to you about drinking legally, the legal drug alcohol. I'm not a drug addict. I do not identify as a drug addict. That does not mean that if I had a toothache and they offered me some painkillers and they said take 2 every 6 hours, that I wouldn't take 6 every 2, that I didn't seek the drugs. And oddly enough, although I went to college in the early 1969, 70, I was not real involved in any kind of marijuana or drugs. A little, but not enough to make it part of my story. So I am Marilyn, and I am an alcoholic. I started drinking, I just told you, in 1969. And I drank until July 11th, 1989. I drank for 20 years. And on July 10th of 1989, I want to tell you that I was a woman who devoted her life to getting my alcohol, drinking the alcohol, and getting rid of the evidence. That was my life. I had gotten into a lot of things that I never, ever, ever thought would be a part of my life. I ended up flunking out of the university. I did make it back to the university. I finished my undergraduate degree. I will tell you that my last year or so of college, I was taking, introduction to try to get my grade point average up. I got an apartment when I got out of school. I got a really good job. I ended up working for the state of Maine. We were doing some pretty exciting work at the time, and I worked with a bunch of very vibrant, wonderful, bright, hardworking, fun, heavy drinking people. We were in social services. We were working with the deinstitutionalized population. We worked hard every day. We played hard at night. And that's what became my life. My life became my work. And that was not a bad way to be at that time. Drinking continued. I ended up keeping the job. And I'm not exactly sure why I kept the job, but I think being a union worker helped. I kept the job. That was great. I ended up marrying a man who could not spell my name. And I know this because in July of 1989, when I was getting divorced, the legal secretaries called and said to me, "How do you spell your name?" And I said, Marilyn. And they said, "We thought so, but he didn't know how to spell your name." All my friends went off to school. They went on to graduate school, but my grades were so low that I wasn't able to do that. And so instead I decided to get married, and I married that man. And when I tell you we should never have gone on a second date, I am not exaggerating. We never should go on a second date. And you know where this story is going. I mean, you know that when I arrived at the halls of AA in 1989, I was dragging a child through this. My drinking, I think I'm a pretty typical, for me, kind of woman. I just drank at home. I don't have an OUI. I don't have any of that stuff. I just drank at home. And I was dragging my son through this. I had a business at the time. I was the landlady, and nobody likes the landlady. But it worked for me because I could do my landladying from like 7 a.m. to noon, and then I could stop drinking and it would be okay because nobody really expects the landlady to call her back. So I did that, and we also had another company that that we ran. And so money was not an issue. To this day, I'm sorry to tell you, I have never bounced a check. I've never gotten a speeding ticket. But I qualify to be here because I lost my soul to alcohol. I was drinking night and day. I by the time I ended up in the halls of AA, and I am going to get to the whole thing, that I was a disappointment as a daughter. My mom and my dad would call and say, Marilyn, what is wrong with you? We didn't raise you to be like this. And I would hang up the phone. I would take my 2-year-old or 3-year-old or 4-year-old down and say, I'll be back in a little while. And they didn't know if I was going to be back in 2 hours or 2 days or 2 weeks. And that was just me, because I would get very busy, running the buildings, which meant drinking. And I was a disappointment as a daughter. I was a failure as a wife. I've already mentioned that when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was in the middle of a divorce. I was actually at the very beginning of a divorce, but it lasted for quite a while. And I was most of all a disgrace. I was an absolute disgrace as a mother. Yeah, good idea. Yeah. And I promise you that all I ever wanted to be was a good mother. I never thought that I would be the woman that alcohol would take me to a place that when my son was 2 and he had pneumonia and he was in one of those little pediatric cribs in the children's ward and he had an oxygen tent over him, that I would get thirsty enough that I would say to the nurses, I have to go home and take a shower. And when they pointed out that there was a shower in his room, I said, no, I have to go home and take a shower. And you know as well as I did, I had to go home and get alcohol. And I brought alcohol into that 2-year-old's room. That's where alcohol took me. And my life truly, I cannot describe to you the despair. Bill writes about despair in the big book, but I cannot tell you the heartache and the pain that was going on. On July 10th, 1989, I was issued an ultimatum. I had thrown my ex-husband out. My parents were barely speaking to me, but I had moved a girlfriend into my house to have her help me with the rent, overlooking the fact that she was not working. And I came down the stairs after really, it was a Monday oh boy, I'd been on a run since the 4th of July. And she said, this has got to stop. And I don't know. To this day, I don't know. I said, yes, yep, okay. And we found a substance abuse counselor about an hour away from the city that I live in. And I went off to see him. Now, I do want you to know that I had 3 beers on the way down to see this guy, because you wouldn't want to run into that sort of thing sober. And I was kind of this beautiful shade of yellow. And I like big sunglasses. And I have a distinct memory of the pair that I wore that day had purple frames. So I must have been a real vision. I had yellow skin, purple sunglasses, and he did his assessment of what was going on with me. And he made kind of his pronouncements. And I went home, drove home, crying the entire way home. And I got into my house and I opened a beer. And I drank off half of it. And I walked across the way to see a friend of mine who, my drinking buddy, we drank every evening together. And he said to me, I came over to see you and you weren't home. Where were you? And I said, well, you will never believe where I have been. And he said, well, do tell. Okay. My friend is a medical records librarian and he had not changed from work. And he had this little bow tie on. I can picture it. This moment, I can picture that little blue and white polka dot bow tie. And he said, well, where have you been? I said, yes, there you go. I have been to see a substance abuse counselor. And he says, I'm an alcoholic and I should go to AA. I saw my friend's hand go behind his back because, of course, he had a drink in his hand. He came to the door to meet me. And his hand went behind his back. And my friend Bob looked at me and said, I think that is a rather hasty diagnosis. And out of my mouth came these words. No, I think he's right. And I have not had a drink of alcohol since that moment. Alcohol on board. I spoke the truth and I have not had a drink since that moment. I know that that was my moment of grace. And the reason that I know that that is my moment of grace is because, left to my own devices, I have a very smart little tongue. And I would have said something like this. Oh, you're damn right. That's a hasty diagnosis. Let's go over, have a few drinks and figure out how we're going to get that quack's license pulled. But that isn't what we did. What we did is we went over to my house and we got all the beer out of the fridge and we got all the good stuff out of underneath the cupboard. Bob knew that there was, really good stuff hidden in the freezer. He pulled that out of there. He dumped it all down the drain. Ooh. And we did all of those things. And then I opened up the community service announcements of our local paper. And it said, AA meeting tomorrow, 12-hour club, noon, Bates Street in Lewiston. Bates Street in Lewiston was a kind of a shady neighborhood. Then the building has been condemned. I showed up at that meeting. And you know what you said to me? You said, welcome, Marilyn. We're really glad you're here. It is so nice that you're here. And I had not a clue what I was doing. I truly did not know what alcoholic. I never heard of. I probably had heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I never connected myself to it. But you said, come on in. We're really glad you're here. And I had not a clue. I had not a clue what I was supposed to do. And you were so kind to me. You said, okay, so this is what you do. Tomorrow you're going to go to this meeting. And that's what we did for the first couple of weeks. People just said, Marilyn, tomorrow you go to this church, or you go to that hall, or you do this, or you do that. I didn't know to get numbers. I didn't know to do anything, but you know what I did know to do? Don't drink. I didn't drink. I had been drinking on a daily basis for 20 years. I spoke the truth. I said I was an alcoholic and I wasn't drinking. Unbelievable. So about like 10 days in, I finally wandered up and I said, what is it? What is this book you people are talking about? And the guy said, you don't have a book? I said, I don't have a book. He said, let's get you a book. And they handed me the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 and 12. And I said, well, can I pay you for these? And he said, no, I don't want you to pay me for them, Marilyn, but you'll pay it back someday. And I said, okay, I could do that. And I kept coming around. I kept coming around and I liked it because you guys were smiling at me and my son was kind of starting to like me, but I was very confused. And it was those first few months for me were very, very, very difficult. I got a job in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was the chip chick. And I would lay in bed at night and I would practice white chip, red chip, green chip. Oh, when we got to the 6-month chip in 1989, where I am, it was aluminum. And it said, think before you drink. The time to call your sponsor is before, not after. So in my keen alcoholic mind, I decided that meant I had to have a sponsor. And I didn't know exactly what that was, but I could see this woman and I could hear her because she was very loud and she was very sparkly and I could see her through the fog. And I asked this woman to be my sponsor. And she was very, very directive. And she was very, very just kind of like, you come to my house and we have soirees and we do this and you do that and you do this and you come at, and it wasn't a good fit. But I figured, okay, I need to mold myself to be like this. And I this is what I have to do. And you know what? God is really, really, really smart, because that woman was not meant to be my sponsor, but her sponsor saw me sitting there and her name was Gloria F. And in 1989, she was probably like 30 years sober. She had sobered up in New York City with Bill Wilson and had found her way to Maine, as so many people do. And she looked at me in the face and said, so how are you doing, Marilyn? And I said, oh, great, love it. I'm really good. It's good. I'm fine, Gloria. And she said, well, Marilyn, I want to tell you something. And even then, I knew when sponsors say that kind of thing to you, you could be in big trouble. And I said, mm-hmm. And she said, Marilyn, whether you are from Yale or jail, Park Avenue or Park Bench, there is room for an AA for you. AA doesn't care where you've been. We care where you're going. And a light bulb went off in my head. Because in 1989, when here, there weren't a lot of women in AA. There certainly, I didn't see anyone like me. The guys were pounding the podium and they were saying things like, I spilled more than you drank. And if you haven't and you know, all of that stuff. And I was hearing jailhouse stories and I was hearing stories of you know, just the stuff, bounce checks. I mean, the stuff that I hadn't done. But Gloria knew. And Gloria knew I was probably getting ready to make a run for it. And it wasn't very long after that I met the woman who I call my first sponsor. And she absolutely was. And her name was Bertha Murphy. And I adored her. And the most wonderful thing had happened in Bertha's life. Bertha had just had to give up her home, her driver's license, and was now on continuous oxygen. So Bertha had lots of time for a little newcomer like me. And when I say a wonderful thing had happened to Bertha, it was great for me. I'm sure she was not that particularly happy about all of those things, but you know what she had taught, what she did? She did what she had to do, which is be of service in Alcoholics Anonymous. And Bertha took me by the hand and through her gentle yet very firm guidance, took this hand and put it in the hand of a loving God personal to me, who has never let go of me from that moment on. Bertha was not a particularly literate woman, but she was the most spiritual woman I have ever met. Had I walked into her small elderly apartment downtown and found her levitating, I would not have been surprised. Bertha introduced me to a non-conference approved daily reader called The Daily Word. And I have read that every day since the day Bertha gave it to me until this morning. I have given people lots of subscriptions to that magazine. And it has opened my eyes to a God loving to me. See, I was raised in a Roman Catholic home, and it was hellfire and brimstone. And I just knew that it was really not for me. I did not make the connection with the Roman Catholic Church. And it was okay. I knew enough. I knew right from wrong. I have a very, very wonderful friend, and who I still have until today, who, when I got clear enough to realize that there was an amends step, which was pretty early on, I realized, oh my God, I had babysat for her children. I had driven drunk with them. I need to make an apology. And so I dashed off and made that apology. And she took me, we cried in her kitchen, and she said, it's okay. Don't do it again. It's okay. When I was starting to examine my the spirituality of the program, and I realized early on when I met Bertha that this is a spiritual program. There was a nun in my kitchen, Sister Fran, and Patty brought her. I have no idea how come. Well, I do, because Sister Fran had to say these words to me when I was saying to Fran, I'm going to AA, and I'm going to try to get back to the church, and it's going to be okay, right, Fran? And Fran said, Marilyn, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Find a God personal to you. And I have found that God in Alcoholics Anonymous. I did not come to AA to find a God. I came to AA to get my mother off my back, to maybe, seal the way for the, a speedy divorce, do better with my son. AA has made me a much better mother. AA has made me a daughter that both my parents are proud of. My dad died when I was 6 months sober. And one of the last things that he said to me, and he couldn't really speak, but he had a big book, and he kind of patted it and said, that's good. They did not raise me to be that. Alcohol had taken all my dignity from me. Alcohol was going to take my child from me. Alcohol was going to do all that. Thank you, God, that I found AA before that. Here often, and I say often, there's a bottom below the bottom, And I listen. And I know, and I listen to when people come back, and I know that there is a bottom below what I had, but I had reached a place that was fine for me to be my bottom. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And Bertha didn't have a lot of time. She had given up her apartment and her home and all of those things, and her driver's license, because she had emphysema and she was dying. And so she didn't have a lot of time. And so we spent every day together. I would drop Ryan at school. I would pick Bertha up. We'd walk every morning at 5 a.m., every evening at 5 p.m. Most of the time I was picking her up to go to meetings. I was driving her vehicle. It was an Oldsmobile 98. Who remembers those? It was a big old road yacht. It had no shocks. And so we'd go up and down there. She was teaching me, you go to a meeting no matter what. I'd be home doing something, and the phone would ring, and it would be Bertha, and she'd say, I'm at the club, and you got to go over to this street and go down in the back apartment up the 4th floor. Get this girl. She just called. She needs to come here. I'm here. Go get her. She was teaching me service above self. She couldn't breathe without continuous oxygen. We would parade around with O2 tanks and the whole deal, and we would sit in her car and she'd say, let's just wait and see who comes out and helps us. She was teaching me that you watch for the who's going to help. And we would go. And as I said, she put my hand in the hand of a loving God that has never let me go. And I had Bertha for about 5 years. And I did a lot. I did a lot. At 8 months sober, Joe and Charlie came to Lewiston, Maine. The original Joe and Charlie. And I was sitting in Bertha's apartment, and this guy handed me a ticket to Joe and Charlie. And I looked at her and said, should I go? And she said, can't hurt. And changed my life because I did the steps in that weekend, the way Joe and Charlie talked about. And then I started to sponsor, and Bertha loved that I sponsored. And she showed me how to sponsor and how to just take people to meetings. And I'm not a sponsor who holds on tight. I really want people to find their own way, because I was allowed to find my own way. I was allowed to make a lot of mistakes. I made a kind of a big one when I was 18 months sober, and Bertha caught me up and said, don't you have a child to raise? And hung the phone up on me. And you know what? I did have a son to raise. And that's what I did. I raised my boy. I did end up getting a divorce. It took 4 years, but I did end up getting a divorce. Along the way, I ended up getting my son's best friend, kind of ended up being my second boy. They were at my house together. Bertha passed away, and there was a hole in my fellowship that I really had a hard time filling. I had a sponsor in name, but there was no one. Those shoes were just too big. But I had the steps, and I was doing the deal, and I was sponsoring, and I always had a sponsor in name. And both of my boys had very serious illnesses, and I had to pray a lot. And you know what? God would show up. Ryan was in the hospital. Ryan is my son. Ryan was in the hospital getting chemotherapy. And I had my big book with me. The RN, who was a pediatric oncology RN, one of us. Of course she was. I would do something else. One of us would show up. So I was always around AA. And when I was a few years, I think 15, 16 years sober, I got the Tape of the Month Club that was an actual tape, and I put it in the cassette deck of my car, and it was a woman named Polly P. And before I was out of the driveway, I knew I had to meet her. And I did. I only in Alcoholics Anonymous could this happen. So I was at Northeast Fellowship of the Spirit, and Jill and Jerry were there, and they were doing the taping. And I said, oh, that's that ladybug retreat. And Jerry said, well, Marilyn, you can go to that, And I went to the old ladybug, and there was Polly. And I just knew it was her when she walked in the door. And I just knew I had to have her as my sponsor. And I had a firm program, but I really needed to sponsor. And I was afraid to ask her. And I don't know if anyone's ever been at a conference with Polly P, but it's very hard to find alone time with her. Saturday afternoon at 3:00, she was alone at the podium. And the girlfriend that I had gone to the conference with said, you better go ask her now, because you're not going to have a chance later, because it's going to get really, really busy. You better go. And I went, I don't think I can. I'm afraid. I had been saying from the podium in my home group and at any group that I was asked to speak on, that I was going to this conference, and please say a prayer for me that I could get a new sponsor, because I really needed one. And if it could be Polly P, that'd be great. and I got chicken. My friend swears to me she did not do this, but something pushed me on the back and I was just sort of carried up to the podium. And I said to Polly, kind of shuffling my feet, would you be my sponsor? And she was so gracious and she was so lovely. And she said, well, honey, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. I'd like to know why you need a sponsor. And I said, my sponsor died. And she said, oh, okay. And what Bertha taught me about service above self and working individually with people and having a God always, and all of that, Polly introduced me to the greater AA world. And the next thing I knew, I was going to the international conference and I was going to the International Women's Conference and I was meeting all of these women and my AA world expanded exponentially. It was unbelievable. Polly is my sponsor today. Polly believes in a big world. And so I have lots of friends in AA now, all over the world. I hope that I have a large AA presence today. And sometimes I get overwhelmed when I think about this woman whose life was getting my alcohol, getting rid of, drinking my alcohol and getting rid of the evidence. Alone in the world, to have the life I have, and all I had to do was put down a drink and do what you asked me to do, which is like 100 million things, but do a searching and fearless moral inventory, stay active in the fellowship, help others, be an example of what Bertha and Polly want me to be. Recently I have become very close to Rena Kay. Be an example of what Rena Kay wants me to be. Be an example of what my women need me to be. And that's what I did. I went back to school. In drinking, I got a master's degree, God knoweth how. I went back to school and I got a second master's degree. I've got a master's degree in social work. I had a private practice. I worked with substance abusing professionals. So I worked with doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs. And I did good work. And I loved it. I worked all over. I worked by myself. I worked all over the Napa. I worked out of my home. I sold the house that I drank in. We lived in a very lovely house. My son made it through the cancer. Both of them did. That's a whole other story. They made it through the cancer. They went off to college. And I did it all with AA. I did it all with AA and God and me. And 9 years ago, I met a boy. And Deborah is now laughing at me because she got to see it. And I fell madly in love with this man. And he did with me. And we're making a life together. Now, here's the thing. When you're in your, like mid 60s and, sort of late 60s, and you get together for about 10 years, you're getting up in years. And it's a whole different ballgame. And illness has entered our home. And it's been a year since the illness has entered our home. And I have had to search during that year and dig deep to find the meaning. And just as we say, sometimes no major decisions in the first year and all that, it's taken me a year to get my feet underneath me. because there's no good outcome here. And it's a matter of just living each day and knowing that God is there. And you know what? He's showing up. I couldn't see him at first. And I use the male pronoun him because, but my God has like, no, it's just way too big. I couldn't see him at first. And I couldn't see the gift that this was. And I will tell you, it wasn't great that Bertha had all this happen, but it wasn't so great for Bill. But you know what? It's okay for Marilyn now. And it's okay. And I'm finding my way again. I'm finding my way again. Life on life's terms. That's what they told me. They weren't lying. Bertha gave me a prayer, and I would like to read it. It is not conference approved. It is the prayer of Thomas Merton. And she gave it to me on this little piece of paper, and it's yellow and it's kind of ripped, but she had her hands on it. And I want to share it with you if I may, and then I'm going to be done. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think that I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore will I trust you, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. I have never had to face anything alone since July 11th, 1989, when I came into the halls of AA. And I know that I don't have to face this alone. So if you're new or coming back, please stay. And if you're not new and are feeling that maybe AA is getting a little, whatever, please know it's not. We need to carry this message. We need to all be the Berthas and the Paulies and the Deborahs and the Stephanies and the Stephen T's in our lives. Somebody needs us, and it might be me. Thank you.